It's time to increase your bankroll by decreasing your daily fantasy sports learning curve. The Curve with Benny Ricciardi and Josh Kalashi starts now.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Curve here at RotoCurve.com, where our mission is to help you guys accelerate your DFS learning curve and get you over that hump to profitability. My name is Benny Ricciardi, and I go by BRich11 on all the daily fantasy sites. I'm here with my partner and co-host today, Josh Kalachi. Josh, how we doing today, buddy?
Doing well. I missed the last 4 days. I haven't been able to just see other than your beautiful face. I haven't been able to do this show. I miss talking to people.
Yeah, it's always nice to bounce some ideas off somebody when you're doing daily fantasy, because no matter how much research you do, there's always somebody that you miss that somebody else might throw on your radar, and you know, after you get a chance to see it, you wind up saying, you know what, that guy makes sense, and try to fit him into some of your lineups too.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. I mean, I think you definitely need to have somebody that you bounce your DFS stuff off of, and it also it makes it more enjoyable because you got somebody to sweat out games with and you know, talk through things as you go. We actually have a lot of stuff to get into today. We have a pretty big show lined up for you guys. It's a big night in the industry today on Tuesday. We got tournaments all over the place. DraftKings is throwing a big $500,000 tournament tonight at a $27 buy-in. That's one of those ones that we say every once in a while when you want to take a shot. You know, this is one of those ones where, you know, you use some of that money you won last week in the cash games and, you know, take a shot for a big prize. Tonight might be one of those nights. We are going to start off by recapping some of the things that happened yesterday. We're also going to get into a little bit of something called reverse engineering, which Josh will get into a little bit later on. So I don't want to get too much into it now, but that's something else that we're going to tell you guys that we think is very important. It's going to be one of our teaching points for today. After that, we'll get into the usual stuff, the weather, the Vegas lines. We'll go over some pitching. We're going to go over our hitters today, and while we're doing our hitters, I'm actually going to have another teaching point that we throw in there. And it's basically going to be some of the Twitter followers that we had asked me a couple questions about how I do my research. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an outline and a little bit of a show of how I actually go through and do my research when I, you know, put together my articles or my research for my teams that I make myself, and might give you guys a little bit of an idea about how to go about the research that you're doing. After that, as always, Josh and I will get into how we're going to be building some of our lineups tonight and, you know, which way we're going to be going with everything. But before we get into tonight, we're going to go over yesterday first. So, Josh, is there anything that you saw on yesterday's slate? And then after we do that, can you also get a little bit into the people about the reverse engineering and looking back on some of the rosters and why that's important?
Yeah, for sure. The first thing that comes to mind when you look at yesterday is I know a lot of people, including myself, I believe you probably had him too, with Bryce Harper. In that first inning, he had a home run taken away from him, which is huge because that's 14-point swing on DraftKings. You're getting 6 on FanDuel. And he ended up with a goose egg for the day. So that one little inch, like we say, in baseball is definitely a game of inches. It's exactly what could have been the difference between cashing and not cashing, especially with that 0 from Harper. Another guy ended up with a goose egg, hit a ball about 475 feet foul. I'm not sure if you guys watched that Mets game yesterday, but Lucas Duda hit probably one of the hardest hit balls I've seen all season, maybe last year as well, but missed a home run by about 2 or 3 feet. Just needed to be a little bit more inside that foul pole. The problem was he ended up with nothing after that. He also had a goose egg. So we always talk about it's a game of inches. Harper and Duda, who a lot of people probably had both of them yesterday, missed 28 fantasy points by about 6 total inches. It's something to look at every day, and that's one thing that the winner of the big 40K moonshot yesterday did have, was he definitely had some home runs. He had some success. Max Alluri, which we'll get into him in a little bit, won that 40K moonshot with a double stack. He targeted 2 lineups in 2 games and went with it. First game he had was the Kansas City, Minnesota game, which we'll talk about this reverse engineering thing, and Benny and I will get into this right now, is you look at the guys that won those big games yesterday and you try to figure out what they did, why they won, why they picked these players. And Max Alluri targeted that game in Kansas City and Minnesota because it had one of the highest over-unders on the day. Produced 15 runs total, I believe. Kansas City scored a dozen runs. And the other part of the stack he went with was Red Sox against Jordan Zimmerman, which at first didn't seem like a positive matchup. But if you look at some of Jordan Zimmerman's numbers, it doesn't favor him in terms of what that park brings in Fenway, which he gives up a lot of line drives, he gives up a lot of fly balls. And that's exactly what the Red Sox did yesterday. They hit a few home runs. Mookie Betts had a 3-run home run. Ortiz hit a ball that might still not have come down yet. So between those two games, that's exactly what Max Dealey won, and that's how he was able to bring his lineup to the top. Now, when we talk about Max Dealey, if you guys aren't familiar with him, he plays multi-entry and GPP, and we're not just talking about 3-4 lineups here. Benny and I have seen him in leaderboards everywhere. This guy's playing hundreds, and he played 1,000 lineups, 999 lineups in the golf tournament. So what this guy's doing, he's playing massive volume. You're going to find him in every big tournament. He's probably going to be playing tonight in that big tournament Benny was talking about. But what he does is he makes basically every lineup possible with the guys that he likes. This is not something that I would recommend for beginners at all. It's not something that is very profitable, and he's just one of the better players on the planet, really. But the thing is, for every winning lineup and winning day he probably has 500 lineups that don't succeed. So when you see him winning first and second place, he's not just winning $10,000. He actually has between $4,000 and $6,000 that he loses. So that's not something I would advise for these newer players, is playing a ton of different entries in these GPPs. We're targeting cash games, and every now and then we'll throw something into a GPP, like Benny said. We're still looking at that 90-10 split, that 80-20 split in terms of cash games, which are 50-50s, head-to-head, stuff like that. So don't become Max Dealey. It's what we always say. You don't need to do that. He's very successful, don't get me wrong, but that's not what our target is. That's not one of the more popular ways to succeed in daily fantasy right away, at least. Now, I'm sure he started off like the rest of us in cash games, winning those 50-50s. At some point, maybe somebody can become the next Max Dealey, and props to you if you can, but right now that's not something we want to target.
Yeah, exactly, and that's there's a couple of good points that Josh brings up there. Multi-entry and playing multi-entry is a whole different animal. It's a whole different set of rules and a whole different set of procedures that you need to learn and follow if you really want to do it right. Otherwise, you're basically just throwing out lineups that, it's what we call negative EV, or negative expected value. The first lineup that you make is going to have all the guys that you really, really, really want to have in your lineup for that day. And that's probably going to be your best lineup. That's probably going to be the one that has the highest chance of success, or the highest probability of, coming out and being the one that's going to wind up winning you money. As you start going on and making more and more lineups, a lot of times you're substituting out guys that you might feel better about for other guys who are a little bit more of a reach or a little bit more of a long shot, and that's not really what you want to do in this situation. As a new player, you don't really have the kind of bankroll, and you aren't able to handle the swings in your bankroll that come from playing that many entries into a big tournament. I mean, I've been playing for a couple of years now, and I don't even do anywhere near the kind of volume that that somebody like Max does. But again, there's different people who have different strategies. He's comfortable winning $100,000 one day and losing $10,000 or $15,000 worth of entries the next day. For what we're trying to do and what we're trying to help you guys get to that level, that's not exactly what we want to target. But we also want you to know that there are different ways to go about doing this. It's something that has a lot more variance to it. You're going to have big swings up and big swings down if you are a tournament player like that. And it's going to be very hard to learn the game and sustain if that's what you're trying to do, because there's a good chance that you're going to go broke trying to do it. I mean, if it was that easy to win $10,000 or $20,000, everybody would be doing it at this point. But even if you do have something that I always get upset when I hear people say is, oh, well, he had 100 entries, he should win. If you think it's that easy, it's really not that easy. The more entries that you put in doesn't guarantee you success by any stretch of the imagination. Like Josh was saying, there are nights that he's going to win big and be up a lot of money, but there are other nights where a lot of those guys that he might have been on don't perform, and he could fall flat on something like that. So, like I said, it's definitely something that we want you guys to understand, but it's also something that we want you guys to realize is probably not the level that you want to be at this point. I mean, basically, unless you have an incredibly large bankroll, or you don't mind losing money or handling big swings, I would kind of stay away from it. But the more important part of it is the reverse engineering. Like Josh said, one of the ways to get yourself better as a player is to go back and look at the winning lineups of all these tournaments that you entered and see what the person did. What you want to do is you want to try to understand the why and the what of everything that's in their lineup. Why did they pick this pitcher instead of that pitcher at a certain price point? Why did they go with this set of bats, or why did they decide to stack this game or to stack that game? And what did that do for them? Did it open up, an avenue or some money for them to go and get some bigger bats? Did it open up an avenue for them to go and get better pitching than the pitching that you had on your roster? You know, there's always something that you can learn every day from playing DFS. So you want to look at what other people have done and try to emulate the people who are successful. And you know what? That's basically how I started and how I started learning how to play here. You know, I would go up to the top of the chart on whatever tournaments I was in. I would see the people in the top couple spaces, try to figure out how exactly they got themselves there. And, you know, after you do it for a little while, you're going to start saying, oh, well, he saw that was a good matchup, or he saw that was a good park, or, you know, he used a couple guys from the game with the highest over-under. And eventually you're able to replicate that and put those things together in your own lineup, and that's where you wind up having your success. So that's just a little bit of a teaching point we wanted to throw out at you guys there today. We're going to get into tonight's slate a little bit. I want to start off by talking a little bit about the weather. Josh, is there any weather issues that you've seen so far today that we need to be aware of?
Currently, it's only looking like there's one game right now. I know where I am, where you are as well, on the East Coast, there's a little bit of a rainstorm coming up. It looks like the Baltimore Yankee game in Baltimore has a little bit of a rain issue. Right now, last I checked, there's about a 40% chance of rain in game time, so be sure to keep an eye on that. You never want to play guys that have a potential to just get that goose egg, to get that zero in your lineups, especially in these 50-50 and head-to-head games we talk about, because it can kill your chance of cashing. So be sure to keep an eye on the weather for that game. If we get clearance before that game starts, be sure to go ahead and put those guys in your lineup, because like Benny does today, and I do as well, is that there's a few hitters that we'll talk about later in that game that we do like. But we need that clearance from that weather. We're going to have to be sure that those guys are going to play. Otherwise, there's no chance we're going to want to put them in our risk-free lineups, aka cash game, which are those 50-50s, which are those head-to-heads.
Yeah, that's it's going to be an important issue to watch that game tonight. Like Josh was saying, there are a couple guys in that game that I have in my cash and my GPP lineups for tonight. I mean, if that game rains out, I'm going to be very mad, and I'm going to be scrambling around last minute. Let's just leave it at that for this point. That's going to be one of the big ones on the slate today. So, like we said, weather's always an issue. You got to keep an eye on it. And actually, the reason why I like that game, to get into our next point, is we're going to start talking about the Vegas lines a little bit. There's a couple interesting things here. I'm going to throw a couple games out there at you. The first one, we'll talk about some of the games with the least runs expected. The first one is one that I'm sure everybody knows about, and that is the Mets and the Phillies game. Matt Harvey's making a start today. That game is back in Citi Field in New York. The Phillies are one of the lowest scoring offenses in the league, so it makes perfect sense that that's going to be one of the lowest games on the totem pole. The one that's a little surprising to me, though, is the other one that's at 6.5 runs today, and that's San Diego and Arizona. You look at the pitching matchup in there, and it's not anybody who's really lights out who you would think that hitters are going to be afraid of on a day like today. But it is one of the lowest games, so it's another one that we have to keep an eye on. Try not to use too many bats from that one. Another one that's surprising to me on the other side, where I would have expected to be a lot higher, is the San Francisco and Colorado Rockies game. There's only a 7. The run total on that game is only 7. It's in San Francisco, not Colorado, which obviously affects the run total in that game. But 7.7 runs for a game with Colorado in it, where Tim Hudson's on the mound. Tim Hudson is not a bad pitch, but he's not somebody who's a lights out stud at this point in his career. So I was a little surprised to see that game being so low. And then the last one is the Chicago White Sox and the Cleveland Indians game. And to be honest with you, I think that has a lot to do with Carlos Carrasco being on the mound again today. He's a guy that had a great game his first time out, and I think a lot of people are going to be on him tonight. He had a big price jump too, though, so we'll get into that and talk about him a little bit later. As far as the high-scoring games go, there's 3 of them that I'm looking at right now. There's a 4th one in the Houston game where they just wound up announcing Brad Peacock as the starting pitcher sometime earlier this morning. So Vegas actually took the run total off of that game, but I think when it comes back, that's going to be an 8 or 9 point run total as well. So that game might be the 4th game that's included in the high total games. But the other 3 are the Angels, the Los Angeles Angels, and Texas is the highest one. They have a 9 run total in that game, so we're going to see some scoring. That's a game where you want to look at a couple bats, I think, especially on the Angels side. As we said before, the New York Yankees and Baltimore game, that one's at either 8 or 8.5 right now. I don't know, depending on, I'm seeing it differently on a couple different sites, but that's an 8 or an 8.5 run game. They're expecting a lot of runs out of there, which makes perfect sense, especially the way Sabathia has been pitching. So hopefully the rain doesn't rain that one out because there's going to be a lot of good fantasy guys that we can target in that one. And the last one is Tampa Bay and Toronto. Toronto's up in the Rogers Center, which is basically the Coors Field of the East, also the Coors Field of the American League as well. It is one of the best parks for hitters in the entire major leagues. So anytime there's a game up in Toronto and the pitchers aren't all that great, you got to keep an eye on it. The rookie is going for Tampa Bay today. I think his name is Anderson. I'm not really sure how to say it. But he's going to be going today against Toronto. So you got a rookie pitching in a hitter's ballpark, so that might not be the greatest thing in the world for him. So you might want to look at some of the Toronto bats in that one as well. But we're going to get into some of the pitching on the day as well. There's 3 guys I really wanted to mention as far as pitching. Josh is going to talk about one. I'm going to talk about the other one. But the one I'm going to start off with is the one that neither one of us are really on today. But I'm just kind of surprised to see where the line is on this game. That is Despaigne from San Diego. He's, if I'm not mistaken, he's a Cuban import. He's a guy who pitched in Cuba for a little while, came over to the major leagues last year. He's a minus 135 favorite in that game for San Diego against Arizona with a 6.5 run total. So it's one of the lowest totals on the day, and he's actually the 3rd biggest favorite on the day. So like I said, he was a guy who I hadn't really been on, and I still don't know if I'm going to be using. But when you're looking at games to target, you want a game with a low run total. And you want a guy who's a heavy favorite because that means he's in a good position for a win, and he's probably also in a good position not to give up a lot of runs, so he won't have many of those negatives. I'm kind of on the fence. He's not really a high strikeout guy. There's an old saying, pitch like a Cuban. He changes his arm angles a lot of times, which winds up keeping hitters off balance. He induces a lot of ground balls. Doesn't get as many strikeouts as a lot of the power pitchers that you see out there. Basically he pitches like a Cuban, and that's what the idea is. It's switching up arm angles, keeping batters off balance, and, making them uncomfortable at the plate. And that's kind of what he does. But I don't know how well it's going to translate into fantasy. But the other 2 big favorites on the day, I'm going to talk about the second one after Josh talks about the first one. I'm a big fan of Jake Arrieta today. He's a minus 150 favorite. He's the 2nd biggest favorite on the board. And the biggest favorite on the board is one that I'm sure everybody's got their eyes on. So I'm going to let Josh talk about him, and that's Matt Harvey.
Yeah, Matt Harvey's the play today. He is the chalk is what the term is. It's what chalk means is basically everyone's going to be on him in the daily fantasy industry. You're going to see a lot of people have him. He's going to be on most teams. And when people refer to the chalk, that's exactly what that means. But the reason why Matt Harvey is the play today is the Phillies are hitting just .216 so far this season. There's only 3 players that are really hitting the ball, and that's Carlos Ruiz, Cody Ashley, and Freddie Galvis. None of those 3 are going to do major damage in one at bat. I believe the career high between all of them and home runs is Carlos Ruiz, he was one season he had a little bit of a benefit, which with certain drugs that he took that may have or may not have contributed to his success. So between Ashley Galvis and Carlos Ruiz, they're not going to crush Matt Harvey. The way Matt Harvey throws the ball is downhill. He throws hard. First came back from Tommy John surgery, he looked incredible. He throws what's called a heavy ball, which for those of you that aren't familiar with the game of baseball, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's like trying to hit a bowling ball with a wood bat, which is hard to do. And that's one reason why he gets a lot of outs. It's one reason why he misses a lot of bats. And that's definitely the first target I believe you should put in all of your cash game lineups is Matt Harvey. The other guy I'm going to talk about he's a little bit lesser priced than Matt Harvey, but he allows you to put a lot of other big bats in your lineup, and that's Shane Green against the Pirates. There's only one team that strikes out more than the Astros, which the Astros coming into the season, everyone kind of looked at their lineup as someone to target because of their strikeouts. But they're second behind the Pirates in terms of striking out. Pirates are striking out about 27.5% of the time so far this season, which is huge for a guy like Green because if he can get 8 or 9 strikeouts, that's going to put him closer to that threshold of 20 fantasy points, which is perfect for your cash game lineups. Green should have an opportunity to strike out a lot of these guys because it's a right-handed hitter lineup. You're going to see guys like Marte, Andrew McCutchen, Neil Walker's a switch hitter, but in terms of the entire lineup, 1 through 9, they have, I believe, 5 righties and 1 switch hitter and 2 lefties. So it's one guy that you want to target, but he's not really expensive. I haven't checked out his price on FanDuel yet, but I know on DraftKings he's very cheap. And that's the second guy I'm targeting with Harvey. That'll open up the salary for the rest of your lineup, and you could spend on some bats, which we'll get to in a little bit. I didn't do too much research on Arrieta yet today, but I know Benny's definitely going to persuade me in a little bit.
Yeah, and just to add to Josh's point, with Shane Green is more of a DraftKings specific play for me. He's 5,800 on DraftKings, and I agree with everything that Josh just said. On FanDuel, I think he's almost 8,000, so he's basically almost as expensive as the guys like Arrieta and Harvey on the day. So I think if you're playing over on FanDuel and you're looking at Shane Green, you should try to probably find a way to get that extra couple $100 to get you up to one of the other guys. Because as much as I like Green, I don't think he has the same upside as a Harvey does today, who I agree with Josh 100%, and probably most of the DFS community is going to agree today. I mean, Harvey on paper is far and away the best pitcher on the day. But to get to the other point is that's actually why I like Arrieta. If you're playing in cash games, you don't want to mess around. If you can get Harvey in your lineup, you get Harvey in your lineup. It's a no-brainer. I mean, he is the best pitcher on the day. And even if you don't have him, you have him in your lineup for what they call the block, because most likely the guy you're playing is going to have Harvey in his lineup. So even if Harvey doesn't have a bad day, even if Harvey does have a bad day, you want him in your lineup because it'll offset, the guy on the other side. And since there's a much higher chance he has a good day, you want to make sure he's in your lineup, because if the other guy has him and you don't, you're basically going to lose your cash game right there off the bat. Because if he goes and puts up a 30 to 40 DraftKings point day, there's very few other pitchers that are going to be able to do that. The one guy who I think makes a lot of sense, though, to swerve off of Harvey in a GPP if you want to be different is Jake Arrieta. Arrieta plays against the Cincinnati Reds today. The Reds strike out an average of 9.2 times per game. So they have a high strikeout rate, so that's going to help Arrieta. He should be able to get some strikeouts there. In his first start this year, he went 7 innings, gave up 3 hits, 3 walks, no runs, and struck out 7. So he winds up in that same range that you would expect him to be in, where he gets somewhere around 30 points. So right around where Harvey is today. And the one thing I like about Arrieta, a little more than Harvey, Harvey might still be on a pitch count. I mean, as great a first game as he had, he went 6 innings, struck out 9 guys, but he only threw 91 pitches. And they're going to be, obviously, I mean, this guy's a stud, so they want to keep him around as long as possible. They're going to err on the side of caution with him. So there is a chance that he might only go 6 again today. It all depends on his pitch count, how many pitches it takes him to get through those 6 innings. But with a high strikeout guy like Harvey, his pitch count does tend to get up there. Even though he throws a lot of strikes and he keeps the pressure on the batters, he's going to have a high pitch count. So if that's the case, if you're looking for somebody that you might be able to beat Harvey with, I think Arrieta gives you a chance there. Arrieta is a guy who goes 7 or 8 innings in most of his starts. He strikes out anywhere between 5 and 9 batters in most of his starts. And the other thing I like about him on DraftKings, excuse me, is he doesn't give up a lot of hits. He doesn't give up a lot of walks. He doesn't have a lot of base runners. He has a low whip, and that's good because you lose every base runner on DraftKings is a negative amount of points. So you don't want to be losing points over there. Plus, he gets a Cincinnati Reds lineup today that, they're really not all that great over there, Cincinnati. They are hitting about 219, I think, so far on the season. So it's not like you got to expect them, to go crazy on them. They do have some power in that lineup. There are a couple guys that can hit the ball out of the yard. But, like I said, Arrieta is one of the better pitchers on the day. There's other guys that you could look at, too. I know a lot of people are going to be on Carrasco. I'm using Arrieta. Basically, like I said before, I think Carrasco is going to be really highly owned, and I think Harvey's going to be really highly owned. So if you're playing in a GPP, Arrieta is going to be that guy that I think might be able to fly under the radar because he costs just about the same amount of money as some of those other guys do. And, like I said, I think he can give you the same upside or maybe even more upside on it, and that'll push you ahead in your GPPs. Plus, if you're looking at him versus Harvey, it gives you a couple extra $100 to spend on bets. And I know that there's a lot of big bets that we want to get into our lineups today. I know Josh has a pretty expensive catcher that he really likes today. You want to start getting into the hitters with everybody?
Yeah, just before we do that, it's another good point you were talking about with the what we like to call the block. If you're playing in these head-to-heads rather than these 50-50s, is actually it'll work in 50-50s as well because of the amount of people that will have Harvey. It's almost a strategy that you want to use regardless of how the results pan out. Like Benny said, if Harvey doesn't have a great day today, most people will have him. Chances are in head-to-heads, especially on FanDuel, just one pitcher, most people are going to have him in their lineups. So if he doesn't play well and the other guy has him just like you do, it's not going to hurt you because it's the same amount of points for both sides, especially in these head-to-head games. And even in 50-50s, I would expect him to be around 30% owned today. So even if you do have him and he doesn't perform well, which the chances are very slight, and that's why we believe that you should start him in your games, but that can just prevent you from losing out on all your games because if both guys have them, it just works like in regular fantasy games. If both players have the same guy, which it's not going to completely just kill your lineup. So say I'm playing against Benny. Benny has Matt Harvey and I have Matt Harvey, and he gives up 6 runs. We're both in the hole. It all depends on the rest of the guys in our lineup. So it doesn't really matter in terms of how a guy succeeds, because if you're playing the chalk, as we talked about, you're going to want to do that, because if Harvey does go off and there is a high likelihood of that to happen and you don't have him, chances are you're not going to win your games. You're not going to win your head-to-heads, and that's something we definitely want to avoid. But now getting into these hitters is, I believe I talked about him twice last week, and I'm going to talk about him again, is Carlos Santana. On DraftKings, he's eligible at catcher, which is a big part of having him in your lineups, because not many other catchers hit in the top 5 of that lineup. The only other guy today was excuse me, a guy like Lucroy, who's been struggling of late, and also Devin Mesoraco, who just got hurt. So the choices at catcher are really slim, which is why I like Santana. In addition to the fact that he's facing a left-handed pitcher, Jose Quintana, for the White Sox, Santana right-handed this year is 5 for 8, which is a very small sample size. But his batting average was also 60 points higher last year against lefties, which is a big split. He hit only about 212 left-handed, but right-handed, which he's going to be hitting today as a switch hitter, he's hitting around 270. So that's an extra 6% chance that he's going to get a hit and a given at bat, and given the chance that he's going to be playing in the top 4 of that lineup, top 5 of that lineup, he's going to get 4 at bats, especially against a White Sox pitcher that has not been dominant in his career. So playing Santana, and you can afford him with the cheap guy like Shane Green on DraftKings, playing Santana at catcher is exactly what you want to do. Be sure not to waste him at first or third with the other options today. Put him in at catcher if you have the money, which you surely should if you go along with a guy like Shane Green, or if you go along with Carrasco over Harvey, which is not exactly suggested, but Carrasco has that high strikeout percentage. So if you can go with a catcher that can get you 10 points, it's going to go a long way for the rest of your lineup, and that's exactly who we're going to target in the next catcher, who's also eligible catcher and first base. I believe Benny likes this guy almost every day, and I'm with him.
Yeah, I mean, again today, I like Carlos Santana too. He's actually the guy I have on some of my GPP teams. But on my cash teams today, I'm actually rolling out Buster Posey. Posey gets a guy in Bergman from Colorado, who's pretty much a young pitcher. He hasn't done much yet in his career. But it's a small sample size, so I don't want to get too crazy about it. But he does have some reverse splits. And just to go over it with you again, reverse splits basically means most of the time a right-handed pitcher is going to be better. It's easier for a right-handed pitcher to get out right-handed batters than it is for a right-handed pitcher to get out left-handed batters. But every once in a while, because of the pitches that the guy throws or his arm angle that he uses when he throws it, there are certain guys who right-handed pitchers that right-handed batters actually hit higher off them than left-handed batters. And Bergman seems to be one of those guys so far in his career in a pretty small sample size. And basically, Buster Posey is one of the best hitters that the San Francisco Giants have. He also does pretty well against right-handed pitching, even though he's a right-handed batter himself. So if you take a guy who has some reverse splits where he's giving up pretty high batting average to right-handed batters, and you take a right-handed batter who actually hits right-handed pitching well, you usually wind up with a pretty good situation at the end of the day. Now, they did face each other last year. Posey has 5 at-bats already lifetime against Bergman. He's 4 for 5 with a home run. Now, I'm not a guy who's a slave to BVP, but I also think it's another one of those tools that you should look at when you're trying to make your rosters. If you know that a guy has the right splits advantage, is in the right kind of park, and at the same point in time has already shown some success against someone, well, then that's just another feather in your cap of why you should use that guy today. So if you are looking, again, I agree with Josh before. I'm using Green in a lot of my lineups, so you're going to have some money left over to spend. So you can spend up and go get the bats that you want. Whenever I have money to spend up and I'm looking for a catcher, I always go to Posey because, I mean, the guy's a former MVP. He's one of the best players in the league. He's one of the best hitters in the league. And, you know, like I said, I think he's in a pretty good spot today. The one drawback he has is it's not the greatest park overall. But again, I think there's so many other things in his favor today that he's a guy that you can look at. There are some other guys at first base that aren't in great parks today but have some pretty good matchups. And I know Josh is really on one in that game over here in New York. So, Josh, who do you like at first base today?
Before we get into that, you brought up a good point, and I'm surprised we haven't mentioned it yet, is BVP. A lot of guys will like to use that. It means batter versus pitcher. But I know for myself and I know for Benny, we like to look at other matchups. But part of the issue with this BVP thing is does it work? I know there's a lot of players that say it will. There's a lot of players that say it doesn't. But is it something that you should look at, Benny? Do you have any numbers on that?
You know, I mean, I've heard the arguments, and I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. We could do an entire hour-long show on BVP. There are so many different people who have so many different reasons or you know, things behind it. But basically, from what the research has shown that people have shown is it's not something that's predictive. When we're looking for how we should build our lineups in daily fantasy, we want something that's predictive, meaning we want to look at the stats that are going to have the most correlation to what should happen today. Now, baseball is very tough to do that with because there's a lot of variance in the sport. You know, we've said it before. Sometimes on the best possible matchup, a guy can go 0 for 4. And he could have, you know, like Josh was saying earlier, excuse me, I'm a little under the weather today. As Josh was saying earlier with a guy like Harper, you know, Harper should have had a home run yesterday. You know, Duda should have had a home run yesterday. But sometimes it's inches one way or inches another. You know, you can hit the ball hard 4 times, but if you hit it right at somebody all 4 times, you wind up 0 for 4 on the day. Whereas you could have a leadoff hitter who, you know, swings over the top of 3 straight pitches, but they're all dribblers down the third baseline, and he uses his speed to beat him out, and he winds up with a 3 for 4 day. Now, if you look at it, you're going to say, oh, he had the better day. He was 3 for 4. Well, really, the guy who was 0 for 4 hit the ball right on the screws 4 straight times, and he just didn't get anything out of it. So when you're looking at BVP, you know, like we said, it's a tool, but it doesn't have the predictive nature that people would say it does. But at the same point in time, I also think it is something that, you know, it's an interesting fact to throw in there. When you're looking at your lineups, and we're going to actually get into this in a little bit about doing your research, there are certain things that you look for. You know, if a guy's playing in a good hitter's park, well, that's a check mark. That's a plus in his box for him. If a guy has a good matchup against a pitcher, that's another check mark that goes in his box. The more check marks you can have in your box, the better the overall picture you can see of that guy succeeding on a day. You know, like I said, I wouldn't take Buster Posey just because he was 4 for 5 against Bergman last year. But when you look at the fact that Bergman gives up a high batting average to right-handed batters, that Posey hits right-handed pitching pretty well for a right-hander, and you throw in on top of the fact that the last time that they did meet, he was 4 for 5 with that big home run, well, it's just another cherry on top. It's just another check in the box. It's just something that kind of gives you a little more faith to know that, hey, you know, this guy has already proven that he can do it before. So it's something that I want to make sure that, you know, I'm on and is in my roster. So that's basically the way that I look at it for BVP. Like I said, I'm not one of those guys who's always going to go BVP all the time. You know, oh, he's 10 for, 35 lifetime. That means he's going to hit, 5 home runs against somebody today. Like I said, if you look at the numbers and you read the research that people have done on it, it doesn't have a very good predictive nature to it. So it's probably not something that you want to make the sole reason that you pick a guy in daily fantasy. But again, it's just another tool in the toolbox. It's another thing that, can give you a little bit of insight on how he's done before and, hopefully a little bit of insight on what he's going to do today.
Yeah, for sure. I'm with you in terms of using it in certain, I guess sample sizes is the way that I would use it. If a guy has 50 or more at-bats, then that's a sample size that you would like to look at. Now, if you look at a guy that's 5 for 10 off somebody, that's only 10 at-bats. It's only 3 games. You never know what happened in those 3 games. So I don't want to say totally avoid it, but I wouldn't use it if there's a small sample size, which is something we always like to target when doing our research. But as for hitters, as for first baseman, today I like a guy named Lucas Duda for the Mets. I just talked about him earlier. He crushed the ball foul against Aaron Harang, which it seems like everybody does and just can't land any hits. I believe Harang gave up about 15 fly balls and line drives yesterday, but still only gave up 4 hits and 1 walk. But Duda faces David Buchanan today, and one of the things about him is he leaves the ball up a lot. If you leave the ball up or right over the plate against lefties, chances are they're going to have a chance to hit it out. And that's what I do like about Duda today. He has 28 home runs and 408 at-bats against righties last year, and his lineup spots warrants opportunity to score runs and drive in runs, which is one reason I like him against a pitcher who has struggled pretty much his entire career in David Buchanan. I know Benny has another first baseman that I may be targeting, but I think he's hitting second in that order now. Does that help him or hurt him?
Well, I think it actually helps him. And the guy that we're talking about is Anthony Rizzo. He goes up against a pitcher in Cincinnati today. I think his name is pronounced DeSclafani, if I'm not mistaken. He's a young pitcher. He's a right-hander. When I was looking at his stats yesterday, he basically struggles against left-handed bats, so that's a check mark in the box for Rizzo. And the other thing that he struggles with is a high fly ball rate to left-handed hitters. Now, as we all know, fly balls could turn into home runs. A guy like Rizzo has a lot of power, so if he can get the ball up in the air and get it out there in Wrigley Field, there's a good chance that's going to carry over the Ivy and get him a four-bagger. So that's actually the reason why I'm a big fan of Rizzo today. As Josh was saying, they moved him up to second in the order, and they do that. They do that right now against right-handed pitching. Basically, what they're trying to do is go lefty-righty with their matchup, so that late in the game, if a team brings on a relief pitcher, they got to keep subbing in relief pitchers back and forth to go up against the righty or to go up against the lefty that's hitting in front or behind them. So they have Rizzo hitting second right now because he's a left-handed batter. They have Jorge Soler hitting third, and then they go down to Chris Coughlin, who's hitting fourth, who's another left-handed batter that hits right-handed pretty well. I think it does hurt Rizzo a little bit in the RBI category. Obviously, if he's hitting third, he's got a chance for two guys in front of him to get on, as opposed to only one. So he's going to have a few less RBI opportunities there. But he's also a pretty high on-base percentage guy. He does draw a ton of walks. People are afraid to pitch to him sometimes. The more, Soler hitting that home run last night is actually big because if he had some protection in that lineup, he's going to wind up getting pitched to a lot more. So if Soler can turn it on, and I don't know if you're a big fan, but we're down to 3 days left on the Chris Bryant watch before he winds up coming up. So when you got guys like Bryant and Soler batting behind you, you're going to see a few more pitches to hit. So we'll see how long they stay with this Rizzo hitting in the two-hole thing. But like I said, today is a day where, I think he's in a good position to get a couple hits, probably have a good chance to drive a ball, which could end up with a home run. And he's also going to be somebody who's on base. He's a high on-base percentage guy. He's going to get on a lot. DeSclafani has a high on-base percentage against left-handed batters. A lot of times he might just walk them and try to pitch the Soler or pitch around them. So he's definitely a guy that I think is in play today. His price is the only problem. If you're playing over on DraftKings, he's either the second or third most expensive first baseman. I think he's about $5,100 if I'm not mistaken. Over on FanDuel, he's a little cheaper. He's down like maybe 6th or 7th on the list. So if you're playing on FanDuel, I think he's definitely a guy that you might want to see if you can fit into your lineups. Over on DraftKings, if you're using green, there is a way to fit him in. You might have to go a little bit lower than you might like at some other positions, but I definitely think that he's a guy I want in my lineups today. Where I thought he was too expensive, I actually went with another guy who I think is in a pretty good matchup, and that's Adrian Gonzalez. Most people are going to shy away from Gonzalez today. This goes up against Iwakuma. But if you look at Iwakuma's stats over the last 2 years, the one thing he does struggle with is left-handed bats. And he gives up, I think he's got about a 210 batting average against right-handers, and about a 275 batting average against left-handers. So it's not like he's a gas can where he's got like a 340 batting average against or anything like that. But Adrian Gonzalez has been, he's been on fire lately. He had the 3 home run game. He's got 4 home run games already. He's definitely a guy who can dial it up. That game doesn't have a very big total, though, so I think it's going to steer people away from it. But like I said, that could be something that's good for him. And, if I can get a guy who's low-owned that has a good chance at upside, he's definitely definitely going to be a great tournament play. And he's also only $4,200 on DraftKings. He's like the 16th or 17th most expensive first baseman today. So if you can get a guy like that, that's basically value territory. If you're getting a guy who's in the bottom half of the league at that position, and with the upside that he has, I think he might be a good guy to look at too. But again, like I said, today's one of those days where if you're using green, you're going to have a lot of money to spend. I know Josh and I are both on some pretty expensive second basemen as well. You want to get into who you like at second first, Josh?
Yeah, both the guys we like on DraftKings, at least on second base, are both the same price. So it's kind of a toss-up depending on who you like to choose between Benny's research and what I have and Jose Altuve. I have a guy that faces Graveman for the A's, who got torched for 7 runs and 3 1/3 in his first start. Altuve's price is a tad low for me today because usually he's up over 5,000 on DraftKings and close to about 4,500 or 5,000, I believe, on FanDuel. But what I do like about Altuve is he can get the job done in many different ways. We talked about that on a show last week, where a guy he's going to have multi-hit games. He had 67 last year, which led the major leagues. He steals 40 bases. He can steal a base anytime he gets on first. He actually has a little bit of power, regardless of the fact that he has one of the smaller frames in baseball. I believe he's listed at 5'6", which may be a little bit nice, I guess, for the guys that try to put his height there. But given the fact that he can hit the ball to all parts of the yard, he can steal bases, he's going to get 4 or 5 at-bats almost every game. I like him in cash games, in these 50-50s and head-to-heads, maybe a little bit more than the guy that Benny likes, which I do like. I did target a lot last week, but considering he's at the same price as Altuve, I'm not quite sure I could be on him. What do you like about D. Gordon today, Benny?
Well, D. Gordon, I'm actually going to use this as an opportunity to answer a question that somebody had sent over to me on Twitter. The other day, I was on Cole Calhoun the other night, and somebody said to me, "What made you pick Cole Calhoun? I would have never thought of that guy." And I walked them through the reasoning why I picked him. Calhoun is a lefty. He was going up against Jeremy Guthrie. Guthrie had a 300 batting average against left-handed hitters. He had given up a home run about one every 5 innings to left-handed batters. And, you know, with Calhoun at the top of the order and was at a good price. And when I walked him through it, he said to me, "How do you know all this stuff?" And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you guys. I mean, I love stats, and I'm a stat nerd as much as the next guy that plays DFS, but this isn't stuff that you have memorized or that you need to memorize. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to kind of walk you through, using D. Gordon as the example, how I go about doing some of these research and finding some of these numbers that Josh and I will talk about. Now, there are a ton of sites that break a lot of this stuff down for you that you have to pay for. But what I'm going to show you is an easy way to do this without having to, you know, go and get a subscription to some site out there and pay a lot of money for it. So what I'm going to do right now is do a screen share with you and walk you through why I think D. Gordon is a good play today. So give me 1 second here while I get everything up. Okay, if you guys can see my screen, this is Trevor Cahill. Trevor Cahill is the pitcher who's going to be going for the Atlanta Braves today. If you go to this MLB.com page, you know, just a regular MLB page, you can go to players or rosters for every team up here at the top where my clicker is at the moment. If you go by team, you can go over to the Atlanta Braves and go down to whoever the pitcher that's going up against the batter that you're trying to see what the splits are for. So like I said, today it's Trevor Cahill, so I have him up here right now. When you come down to the middle of the screen, you're going to see it says career, game log, splits, and batter versus pitcher. So if you click on the splits portion of it, it's going to give you the splits that that pitcher has for whatever the time frame that you're looking at is. You can switch the year, so this would be 2015. Since this is Cahill's first start, he has no stats there. I usually like to go back maybe 2 or 3 years to take a look and see where we're going. So if you go back to 2014 and you go down to the lefty-righty splits that he has, you can see that against left-handed batters, he pitched 47.2 innings against left-handed batters last year, and he gave up a 346 batting average. That is huge. Anything over like maybe a 270 or 280 is a guy who I think you can look at to target against. Anybody who has, you know, a 346 batting average against basically means that, you know, any lefty that you see in the lineup automatically gets a green light that you want to be able to try to put him into your lineup and try to be able to use him. Now, if you look at the number next to that where it says WHIP, that means walks and hits per innings pitched. So against left-handed batters, if he was to pitch an inning against 5 left-handed batters, 2 of those 5 are going to get on base. Now, a guy like D. Gordon has been hot lately. He's been getting multiple hits in a couple of these games. He's been getting on base, and he's been, you know, causing some ruckus on the base paths, which is why I really like him today. Because I think against a pitcher like Cahill, if he gets maybe 3 at-bats against Cahill before Cahill gets pulled from this game, there's a good chance he's going to get on base at least once, if not more. Now, once he is on base, he's always a big threat to steal. Which brings me to another thing that I want to show you on MLB.com where you'll be able to do some research. People always say to me, well, how do you know or how can you predict the stolen base? And stolen bases, in my opinion, are actually easier to predict than something like a home run is. So what we're going to do is this is the 2015 stat sheet where you can go over to fielding stats. So I'm going to actually pull it back to 2014 so we can get the whole season view on it. One of the things you're going to notice here is the catcher this year for the Atlanta Braves is going to be Jared Saltalamacchia. So he's the guy who's going to be trying to throw out D. Gordon as D. Gordon tries to steal. He has given up 72 stolen bases, and he only caught 17 runners last year. So he has basically an 8-10 stolen base percentage against him. That basically means 4 out of every 5 guys who try to steal off Saltalamacchia wind up being safe. So he is one of the worst in the league against the stolen base. So if you have a guy like D. Gordon who you think can get on base a couple times today, and the catcher that's trying to throw him out is one of the worst in the league that's going up against him, it's going to be a good situation and a good spot for you to use, you know, D. Gordon in. If you're going to use D. Gordon in that spot, you got to think he's got a high likelihood of both getting on base and stealing a couple bases, which also means he should be in a good position to score a couple runs. So if D. Gordon can get on base, steal a base, and score a run for me, that's 10 points every time he can do that in one at-bat. If he can do it twice in a game, that's 20. That's even better than somebody who hits a home run and goes 1 for 3 for you. So, like I said, I mean, it's not a slam dunk, and it is a guy that I like, but that's how I got around to the fact that I think D. Gordon is going to be a good play today. Now, believe me, I understand he is very expensive. He's not somebody who's cheap. He's not somebody who's going to fit easily in your lineup. But again, like we said, if you're using a guy like Green today, you're going to have money in other spots that you're going to be able to spend on. So that's just a little bit of a teaching point that I wanted to show you guys. You don't need to go out and spend a ton of money on all these fancy subscriptions. There are some very good ones out there. I know Josh is a big fan of Fangraphs. I use it sometimes myself. There's a lot of advanced metrics and a lot of advanced stats you can go and get out there. But there's also basically the same people who put those stats and advanced metrics together. They got to find them from someplace too. And the MLB.com website has everything that you need to do all the research you would want to need if you're willing to put the time in. Now, if you don't have the time or you're not willing to put the time in, a lot of those subscription services basically do that research for you and break it down nice and easy for you on a day-to-day basis. So it makes your life easier as somebody who's researching DFS. But at the same point in time, if you really want to know, get into it and know where those numbers come from, everything that you need is on the MLB.com site, and you can find it all, rather easily. So if you have some time after your lineup's locked while you're sweating games, just throw on that site, look around a little bit, and you'll see some of this stuff. A lot of the things that we use on there we're going to be bringing over as well to the RotoCurve site. So you're going to start seeing some of these, some of the things that Josh and I talk about are going to start being up there for you to see right on our RotoCurve site. So we're actually going to break it down for you a little bit too and cut down a lot of your research time with it. But now that we're done basically talking about second base, let's move on to third base today. Third base was a really tough position today. I know Josh and I went two different ways with it. The guys that I picked are guys that I think have a good chance to succeed today, but they're both going to be what I would consider to be low owned because they're a little more under the radar, and the case for them is a little bit harder to see. Josh actually went a different route. He decided to save a little bit at third base with his option, which the more I look at it is actually not a bad play. So Josh, let me ask you about it. Why did you go the way you went at third base today?
Well, third base on DraftKings, you can play DJ LeMahieu for the Rockies. He's eligible at both second and third. It's one of the few times that I would suggest playing a player towards the bottom of the order, which we've touched on before in this show. The other guy that does a show on this site is Michael Rathburn. He touches on this a lot. But the way I look at the Rockies lineup, there isn't necessarily a bottom with all those hitters, especially when they play at home, which they are on the road today. But in terms of DJ LeMahieu, he only has 2 games this season where he only has 1 hit. That means the rest of the games he has at least 2. I know he had 3 yesterday. He's 15 for 29 on the season. Sometimes a lot of guys don't like to use the term seeing the ball well, but if a guy's 15 for 29, he's had 3 hits yesterday. I believe he has 14 hits in the last 5 days. He's on fire. He's seeing the beach balls we like to use for those of us that just every now and then you get in that groove. It's like when a basketball player can't miss, like Klay Thompson last night. Sometimes guys just ride that hot streak. And that's definitely one of the things I'm targeting with DJ LeMahieu today, because his price is very low. And even though he hits 8th or possibly 9th, depending on what the Rockies manager wants to do with that lineup, he's going to be on base for guys like Carlos Gonzalez and Troy Tulowitzki. So even though he does hit lower in the order, it's like he hits leadoff, depending on if the Rockies lineup can hit. And he faces Tim Hudson, who has given up a lot of hits at this point in his career to lefties, which last year he gave up 107 to lefties in just 97 innings. If you don't want to go cheap at third base, you can go with Miguel Cabrera, who is still very underpriced for some reason that I can't figure out, especially on DraftKings. He's only at $4,900 at third base, which means he's the 2nd or 3rd most expensive option there. If you've been paying attention to the Tigers of late, they can't stop scoring runs. One of those main reasons is Miguel Cabrera. He went 2 for 4 with a double yesterday. 2 days ago, he went 4 for 4 with 2 home runs. He has at least 16 fantasy points in 4 straight games. You're not breaking the bank trying to get him into your lineup. So if you don't want to go cheap and go with LeMahieu, you can go with Miguel Cabrera on DraftKings. And I believe he's still just a tad underpriced on FanDuel. But even if he isn't, the guy's on fire right now, and he has a decent matchup, and he has guys all the way around him in that lineup that can score and drive him in if he gets on base.
Yeah, third base, like I said, third base, there's a lot of ways to go today. There's nobody that really stands out one way or another. I like both of the guys that Josh mentioned. There's another guy that I'm actually on as well, and that's David Wright for the New York Mets. Wright goes up against Buchanan for the Phillies. Buchanan's another guy. He has very limited sample size. He hasn't been in the league very long, but he has been worse against right-handed. He's a right-handed pitcher, but he's been worse against right-handed batters for some reason. Basically, in this matchup, the reason why I like Wright is Wright's a guy who's averaging about 9 fantasy points a game. When you want to put a guy into your cash game lineup, that's basically what you're looking for. I try to get about 50 points out of my pitching in my cash game lineups if I'm playing in a 50-50, and I try to make sure that I can get about 70 points out of my batters. If you add those two together, you wind up at about 120, and 120 will cash for you in the 50-50 almost every day of the week. Unless it's one of those days where everybody's on a couple guys who go for like 30 or 40 points, 120 is usually a safe number to target. So with all the batters that you have in there, you want 9 points for every batter that you put in there. That's like I was saying last week with a guy like Matt Carpenter. If you can get 8 to 12 points out of the guy that you put in your cash game lineup, you're going to wind up where you need to be at the end of the night. And I think David Wright is a guy who today can get me those points. As I said, Buchanan's not that great against right-handed pitching. So if you put David Wright in your lineup, there's a good chance that he can get you 1 or 2 hits. He also has a good chance to get walked where he's sitting in the lineup, and he also has both the opportunity to drive in some of the guys in front of him and the opportunity to be driven in by some of the guys behind him. So when you're looking for safety and you're looking for a guy who's pretty consistent, Wright is pretty consistent. He doesn't hit a lot of home runs, especially at home in in Citi Field. It's not really a great hitter's park. But Wright is a really consistent average hitter. He will get some hits. He might wind up with a double on the day-to-day. He might have a walk. He might score a run. He might drive in a run. And if he can get you, a double, a walk, and a run scored, that's 10 points. That's all you need for your cash game to make him a valuable play. Plus, the other thing I like about him is he's only 4,100 over there. I think he's about the 10th or 11th most expensive third baseman. So you're getting a guy who's in the middle tier, price-wise, that can give you the production that you need, and is also pretty safe with the safety that you need to give you, the score that you want to wind up with at the end of the day in your cash games today. There is one other guy I'm going to mention as well. I don't like the matchup as much, but I have found myself putting a little bit of Josh Harrison in my lineup. In the places that I didn't use Shane Green. I think Shane Green's going to be pretty highly owned because, as we have mentioned, he opens up a lot of avenues to some of those big high-priced bats. So if you do want to have something that's a little bit of a swerve for a large pool tournament today, if you target some of those pirate bats, they're probably going to be a little bit lower owned. Harrison's a guy who does hit well against right-handers, so if Green struggles today, Harrison could be one of those guys that takes advantage of it for him. But like I said, third base is a tough position today. There's a lot of ways to go with it, so it's going to be one of those things that decides where you wind up in the money if you can pick the right guy. But let's move on to shortstop right now. Josh, who's your shortstop for today?
I'm just going to roll off some names here. One guy like Jimmy Rollins he's a cheap price considering the lineup he's hitting in. He faces Iwakuma, which Benny talked about earlier, actually gives up a higher batting average to lefties than you would imagine. But I like a guy that can get on base in front of a guy like Yasiel Puig, in front of a guy like Adrian Gonzalez. He has a chance to score. Like Benny just said, if you can get those 10 points in your cash lineups, which is for those 50-50s and head-to-heads, it put you well on your way to cashing for the dividend day, especially on DraftKings. Rollins can also steal bases, so he has that upside. So you're not just limiting your upside going for a safe play. Rollins is actually both. Moving on to outfield, there's 2 guys that I like that I really think should be in your DraftKings lineups for sure. One is Nori Aoki. He's been on base at least once in every game this season, and he's reached at least twice in all but 2 games. He's what we call a cash game must at his price, which means he's very cheap, but he's very consistent. I mean, hitting leadoff in that lineup, he has a chance to score some runs. He has some speed. He can steal some bases, and he has one of the better eyes in the game for a left-handed hitter. So he can get those walks, which is still 2 points regardless of how a guy gets on base. He's able to do that. One other guy, and I think both Benny and I are both on, is Adam Jones. I think he's the play of the day for me. Adam Jones sees left-handed batters just a lot better than most other guys in the league. He's hitting 344 last year off lefties, which that's just an absurd amount. That's in a hit every 34% of the time he bats. Also, Jones is 10 for his last 14 with 3 home runs and a double. The guy right now is just on fire. He's single-handedly keeping the O's in these games. He's driving in runs. He's scoring runs. And this guy doesn't strike out or walk much. He swings the bat almost every at bat. So you're going to get a chance for those hits. You're going to get a chance for doubles. You're not going to have to settle just for those 2 points with walks. Although it's not a bad thing, hitting him the top of the lineup like Jones is, it gives him an ample opportunity to hit a home run, to hit a double, to get on base. And he actually has some speed to steal. So he's not one of the more expensive guys in the outfield, but he definitely has one of the best matchups, and he's one of the hotter hitters in the MLB. So for today, Adam Jones is my play of the day.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with Josh on that too. That's why I said earlier in the day I'm going to be really upset if that Baltimore-New York Yankee game rains out, because Jones is a guy who I have in every one of my lineups, cash, GPP, or otherwise today. CC Sabathia is not the same pitcher that he once was. If you look at his stats over the last 3 years, he's basically giving up about a 300 batting average right now to right-handed batters, and a lot of home runs to go along with it. With the way Jones is hitting and with the how badly Sabathia has been pitching, I mean, it's basically the perfect storm for you for fantasy. It should be a big day for him. And also, I mean, I'm going to stick in that same game. I'm going to go with his teammate, Steve Pearce, as well. He's another guy that I've been throwing in there for pretty much the same reason. Pearce hits left-handed pitching very well. DC Sabathia does not pitch very well to right-handed batters, and that's going to give him a pretty big leg up on it for today. I'm going to throw two other names out there for you. Chris Coughlin from the Chicago Cubs is another lefty. He's the guy that I mentioned before when we were talking about Rizzo, who's batting cleanup. He's a little bit cheap today, so he'll allow you to, he's the other cheap guy that I've been throwing in there along with Green to allow me to pay up for some of these big bats that I have been talking about. And the last guy is somebody who I think you should definitely have your eye on, and that's Nelson Cruz. Nelson Cruz gets a matchup today against David Huff. David Huff is a cast-off from the Cleveland Indians organization, but the reason why it's important is he's a left-handed pitcher. Now, normally left-handed pitchers do pretty well against the Seattle Mariners this year, but I think that the reason why they went out and got a guy like Nelson Cruz is so they could counteract some of that left-handed pitching that they keep seeing. So Cruz is a guy who's going to hit well against a left-handed pitcher. He had a home run yesterday, so he's hot. He's locked in at the moment. The ballpark is not the greatest for him for a home run hitter, the ballpark he plays in tonight, but he's another guy that I think could have a big day today, so you should have your eye on. So basically that wraps it up for us with all the all the positions that we have to go over today. Josh, why don't you give the people a little bit of an idea of how you're going to build your rosters tonight?
Well, first and foremost, I'm putting Matt Harvey and Adam Jones in my lineups right away. Those are the two guys that I'm building all my lineups around. Probably for my main lineup on DraftKings especially, I will be going with Shane Green. As we talked about, his price is a lot lower than it is over on FanDuel. But with the cheap guy like Green and Harvey, I can still fit in Carlos Santana. I can fit in Miguel Cabrera. Can fit in even Jacoby Ellsbury at that third outfielder spot. Now, in order to do that, you will need some cheaper bats, and that's what Norichika Aoki and Lucas Duda can do for me. So there's a lot of ways you can go on DraftKings if you go with Shane Green, and like Benny said, that's probably why he will be highly owned, but that's the direction I'm going in because you don't necessarily have to worry about own percentage in cash games in these 50-50s. You're just targeting a safe amount of points between 100 and 110. You get 120, like Benny said, you're going to cash 9 times out of 10 most days unless there's a day where a Colorado Rockies stack scores 13 runs or something like that. But that's the direction I'm going in, and maybe in a GPP I'll throw in Arrieta. I like what Benny was talking about with him. But for the most part, for the most of my lineups, I'm going to be rounding it out with Matt Harvey, with Adam Jones, and probably Miguel Cabrera given his price.
Yeah, and for me today, I mean, I'm going to agree with a lot of what Josh said. For any cash games that you're playing in today, Harvey is the guy that you got to go with on top. I mean, he's basically the nuts for a day like today. He's the safest play out there. He's got upside. I mean, and everybody else is going to have him too. So if you're playing in a cash game and you're not using Harvey, you're basically not only hoping that the guy you pick outperforms him, but you're hoping that Harvey underperforms, because if he has the day that most people expect him to have, you're going to be behind the 8 ball trying to make up those points. Shane Green is the other guy who I think is almost a must for cash games. I mean, I don't ever like to say a must for anything, but that combination of guys together is probably about the safest points that you can get based off their prices today, and it does open up the avenue to allow you to get almost whatever bats you want. I mean, you could fit whatever bats you want in there without having to take more than one, maybe 2 mid to low price players. You can fit anybody that you want in there. So I'm going to have a lot of the Baltimore right-handed bats against Sabathia. I'm going to have a lot of the Cubs left-handed bats going up against DeSclafani. I'm also going to have a lot of D. Gordon, as we went over before. I think D. Gordon's in a great spot today. I also think Jose Reyes, who is in a very good spot today. He's back up hitting in Toronto. He's going to be another guy who I think is going to be well owned. Actually, I think he might actually go off lower owned because he's very expensive on the day today. So if you can get a guy who's the best at his position at lower ownership, I'm going to be trying to squeeze him in my lineups, thinking that I can get some extra points out of the shortstop position there. And then I'm going to round it out with some of the bats that we talked about, some of the value guys, some of the cheaper guys, depending on how much money I have left available. I do like guys like David Wright, I do like guys like Rizzo and Adrian Gonzalez. So those are going to be some of the guys that I look at today. And, like I said, it's going to be different for GPPs. For GPPs, I'm going to have Arrieta in there. I may even try to put Arrieta and Harvey there together if I can find enough cheap bats I like. But if not, I think Arrieta is going to be the lower owned of the trio of Harvey, Carrasco, and Arrieta. So he's going to give you the most upside in a GPP at low ownership. And I think that if you can link him, you're going to be able to get some of the same bats that you're able to get by putting Harvey in there, maybe even some of the better ones. So you can upgrade that one guy who's kind of, low price that you wanted in there. You could upgrade him by using an Arrieta over a Harvey. It gives you an extra $900 to upgrade one of those bats. So when I go to my GPP lineups to build them, they're going to look pretty similar, just maybe with him thrown in there. And, hopefully it wins me $50,000 in that big $500,000 DraftKings tournament tonight.
That would sound good. I definitely will be coming over to celebrate some of that if you do win. That's bringing us to the top of the hour here. We will see you tomorrow, Wednesday at April 15th at noon. We'll be back with the next episode of The Curve. One big thing that we just saw in the forums on RotoCurve.com, which you guys can join in and see some information, and we'll be talking about some stuff throughout the day, is the rain in the Baltimore game apparently will be out of Baltimore by game time. So that's great news. Be sure to keep in mind that radar, because sometimes it can change. But right now that Baltimore game looks good to go. So yeah, we will see you tomorrow. And for Benny Ricciardi, I'm Josh Kalachi. Can't wait to talk to you guys tomorrow. And as always, Benny has something to say.
That's right. Stay classy, DFS. We love you guys, and good luck tonight.